03:47 a.m., March 19th, 2026. The Strait of Hormuz. On the surface, silence. Black water, no tankers, no cargo ships, no lights on the horizon. Just the kind of stillness that doesn't feel like peace. It feels like held breath. 21% of the world's traded oil, 17% of global LNG. Gone, not destroyed, not burned. Simply by be stopped. By a decision made in darkness, executed in silence, and felt in every stock exchange, every refinery, every kitchen table where energy bills land like a verdict. But here's what no one is telling you. Iran launched. Iran struck. Iran sent wave after wave of Shahed drones and ballistic missiles into the Gulf night. The same weapons that had rattled Riyadh, that had humiliated Saudi air defenses, that had rewritten the rules of asymmetric warfare for 2 decades. And something stopped them cold. Not a carrier strike group, not a headline, not a diplomatic warning. Something that, according to several defense analysts, arguably should not exist at this operational scale. Not yet, not in 2026. So the question you need to sit with is this: what is actually controlling the Strait of Hormuz tonight? And who put it there? This proper procedure Jarek gave for deten to see backward and I'm. Before we go any further, here's exactly what we're going to break down in the next 20 minutes. Layer 1, why Iran's asymmetric drone strategy, say, are 20 years and billions of dollars in the making, collapsed in a single night. Not bad luck, by design. Layer 2, the weapon system operating silently beneath the Arabian Sea right now. The one mainstream media refuses to name directly. The one that may be the real reason Iran has not escalated further. Layer 3, the economic chessboard behind this conflict. Who actually profits when Hormuz closes? The answer will surprise you, and it is not who you think. Layer 4, 3 specific scenarios for the next 90 days, with exact signals to watch, so you know which path we are on before the headlines catch up. Everything is moving fast, faster than any news cycle can track. If you are not subscribed yet, do it now, because by the time mainstream media explains what happened here, the 90 side for buy buying for cheese for be for chai and LJ be ambis additions at the chain. Let's establish something first. Hadir Iran did not stumble into this confrontation unprepared. This was not improvisation. This was not desperation. What Tehran unleashed in the Strait of Hormuz was the product of 2 decades of calculated, patient, and genuinely sophisticated strategic investment. And that is precisely what makes what happened next so devastating. For 20 years, Iran built its entire military doctrine around a single elegant principle: use the cheap to destroy the expensive. A Shahed 136 drone costs approximately $20,000 to manufacture. A single Patriot interceptor missile costs between $3 and $4 million. Do the math. If Iran launches 200 drones and the enemy shoots down every single one, Tehran spends $4 million. The enemy spends $800 million. Iran loses the battle. Iran wins the war of attrition. On paper, this is not just logical. It is genius. Iran poured everything into this doctrine: drone swarm warfare, naval mine deployment across choke points, anti-access and area denial systems designed specifically to keep American carrier groups out of the Persian Gulf. These were not the weapons of a rogue state throwing punches in the dark. These were the weapons of a strategic actor that had studied American military doctrine obsessively and identified every structural vulnerability. But here is where the catastrophic calculation begins. Iran designed this doctrine to fight the United States military of 2006, the carrier groups, the shock and awe campaigns, the overwhelming conventional superiority. That enemy, Iran understood completely. What Iran did not model, what Iran did not wargame, what Iran did not account for in any serious operational planning was an enemy that had quietly, methodically, invisibly transformed the entire architecture of how modern warfare is fought. Multi-domain integration. Artificial intelligence-enabled command and control. Electronic warfare systems that do not intercept weapons. They erase the weapon's ability to function. These capabilities did not exist at operational scale during Iran's last serious strategic review. and Tehran never updated its assumptions. Then came the threat announcements: RAF Fairford, RAF Mildenhall, RAF Lakenheath. Iran placed British bases directly in its crosshairs and broadcast that fact to the world. This was not strength. This was the single most consequential strategic error of this entire conflict, because when you publicly threaten a nuclear-capable power's military installations, you do not create fear. You eliminate hesitation. You hand your opponent the political justification, the domestic mandate, and the operational urgency to deploy every available asset into the region, immediately, aggressively, and without apology. Iran did not corner the United Kingdom. Iran invited the United Kingdom to go to war. Provided the address. The bravado of a regime that believed it understood the board, that believed it held the choke point, that believed the old playbook still applied. It did not. The board had already changed, and Iran was the last to know. Now we get to the part that mainstream media cannot explain, because explaining it requires understanding not just what happened, but why it was designed to happen exactly this way. 4 announcements, 4 layers, each one more invisible than the last. Announcement number 1, the weapon that fights without fighting. Everyone reported on the drone intercepts, the dramatic footage. 14 Shahed kamikazes turned into fireballs over the Gulf in a single night. A record, historic, unprecedented. What nobody explained was the mechanism that made those intercepts almost trivially easy. Meet the Orcus system, the RAF's most advanced counter-drone electronic warfare platform. And here is what separates it from every other air defense asset in the region. It does not wait for a drone to arrive. It reaches out and erases the drone's identity before it can complete a single navigational calculation. Orcus disrupts GPS signals. It floods drone command frequencies with noise. It severs the data link between the operator and the weapon mid-flight. When a Shahed loses its signal, it does not detonate. It does not it simply forgets where it is going and and falls. The cost of each intercept using electronic warfare alone is functionally close to zero. Iran spent $20,000. The drone fell into the Kuwaiti desert. No explosion, no damage. No footage worth broadcasting. This is not defense. This is economic warfare conducted at the speed of radio waves. Iran's entire cost exchange doctrine, the foundational logic of 20 years of asymmetric strategy, was not defeated by a better missile. It was rendered mathematically incoherent by a system that costs almost nothing to operate per engagement. Paired alongside Orcus, the Rapid Sentry air defense platform handled physical destruction for anything that survived electronic disruption. Giraffe radar, short-range intercept, clean kills. The combination was not a defense network. It was a processing system. Input, Iranian drone. Output, debris. Announcement number 2, the thing beneath the water that changes everything. This is the one mainstream media circles around without ever landing on directly. HMS Anson, Astute-class nuclear attack submarine, departed Perth, Australia, traveled approximately 5,500 miles, currently operating somewhere in the Arabian Sea. Here is what makes HMS Anson categorically different from every other asset in this conflict. Every other system we have discussed is visible, locatable, counterable. Iranian military planners can map the Sky Aber batteries in Saudi Arabia. They can calculate patrol corridors for Typhoon jets over Bahrain. They can model the radar coverage of HMS Dragon in the Eastern Mediterranean. They cannot find HMS Anson. An Astute-class submarine running silent produces less acoustic signature than the ambient noise of the ocean around it. Iran's coastal radar networks, sonar arrays, and maritime surveillance systems combined cannot reliably detect its position. It could be 40 miles off the Iranian coastline right now. It could be 200 miles away. Tehran does not know. Tehran cannot know. and it carries Tomahawk Block 4 cruise missiles with a range exceeding 1,000 miles and a circular error probability measured in single-digit meters. Consider what this means strategically. Every decision made inside Iranian military command, every launch order, every escalation calculation, every risk assessment must now account for a threat that has no fixed location, no detectable signature, and no political threshold that Tehran can reliably predict. This is not a weapon system. This is a psychological architecture, a permanent uncertainty injected directly into the enemy's decision-making process. The hypothesis that several strategic analysts have quietly advanced, and which no major outlet has yet examined seriously, is this: HMS Anson may be the actual reason Iran has not crossed the final escalation threshold, not the drone intercepts, not the coalition statements, the submarine that nobody can find and nobody's officially discussing. Visibility is vulnerability. HMS Anson has none. Announcement number 3, the choke point that ate the choke point. Iran's Hormuz strategy rested on a weapon as old as naval warfare itself: sea mines, cheap, devastating, legally ambiguous enough to deploy without formal declaration of war, capable of closing the world's most critical maritime corridor to any vessel unwilling to risk annihilation. This was Iran's ultimate leverage, the physical lock on the global energy system. And Britain arrived with a key that Iran's strategic planners had never modeled, because it did not exist when those plans were written. Fully autonomous mine countermeasure systems, unmanned surface vehicles 12 meters in length, equipped with towed high-resolution sonar arrays capable of millimeter-level seabed detection, remotely operated underwater vehicles for precision neutralization. All of it coordinated through an artificial intelligence-enabled command platform called M-Cube, managing every unmanned asset, every sensor, every neutralization sequence through a single integrated digital architecture. The entire operation conducted without placing a single British sailor inside the minefield. Here is the strategic significance that nobody is framing correctly. Iran's naval mine doctrine was always calibrated against human risk tolerance: place enough mines, make the clearing operation dangerous enough, make the political cost of casualties high enough, and eventually the coalition fractures. That calculus assumed human mine hunters. It assumed body bags. It assumed domestic political pressure building inside coalition governments as sailors died clearing Iranian ordnance. Remove the humans. The calculus evaporates entirely. Britain did not just neutralize Iran's mines. Britain neutralized the entire strategic logic that made mines Iran's most powerful card. And here is the economic reality that ties all 3 announcements together. Iran believed Hormuz closure was a weapon pointed outward, at Europe, at Asia, at the global economy. What Tehran failed to calculate was the weapon's blast radius curves back. The United States is a net energy exporter. Hormuz closure drives oil prices toward $180 per barrel. And American shale producers and LNG exporters absorb windfall revenues that dwarf any diplomatic cost. Saudi Arabia and the UAE maintain alternative export infrastructure: the Petroline pipeline, the Habshan to Fujairah corridor. Their oil moves. Iran's own informal export channels, the shadow fleet, the sanctioned crude moving through intermediaries, run directly through the waters Iran just mined. The choke point Iran built to strangle its enemies is anatomically connected to the arteries Iran needs to survive. This was not a trap set by London or Washington. This was a trap Iran constructed, furnished, and then walked into with absolute confidence. The most dangerous illusion in geopolitics is believing you understand the board when the board has already been replaced. Now let me show you the moment when the entire strategic picture snapped into focus for the people who actually run things. March 19th, 2026, Brussels. 35 nations signed a joint statement demanding safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz. That sentence sounds like routine diplomatic boilerplate. Read it that way and you miss everything. Look at who signed: Japan, a nation whose post-war constitution was written specifically to prevent it from participating in collective military action abroad. A nation that meets approximately 87% of its crude oil requirements through the Strait of Hormuz. When Japan signs a joint military posture statement, not a trade communique, not a humanitarian declaration, a military posture statement, you are witnessing a country that has calculated its economic extinction scenario and decided that constitutional tradition is now a luxury it cannot afford. Canada and the United Arab Emirates in the same coalition. Think about what that pairing represents. One is a major oil producer with zero geographic stake in the Persian Gulf. The other is a sovereign wealth fund with a military. The only logic that places them at the same table is that both have independently concluded the alternative, a permanently disrupted Hormuz, is categorically worse than the political cost of alignment. Germany and Italy provided diplomatic pressure. France co-chaired operational military planning with the United Kingdom. This was not a coalition of the willing. This was a coalition of the economically terrified. And here is the insight that Sun Tzu articulated 2,500 years ago, and that this conflict has just demonstrated in real time at industrial scale. Supreme excellence in warfare consists of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. HMS Anson fired nothing. AUKUS spent almost nothing. The autonomous mine hunters put no lives at risk. Britain won the engagements that generated no footage, no explosions, no drama. And that is precisely why mainstream media missed it entirely. Here's where analysis separates from speculation. I'm going to give you 3 specific scenarios for the next 90 days. Each one has observable signals. Watch for them. Scenario 1, the managed de-escalation. This is the highest probability path based on current indicators. Call it 45%. Iran's economy was already operating under catastrophic stress before the first drone crossed into Gulf airspace. Inflation running at levels that have historically preceded regime instability. Currency in freefall, a population whose tolerance for economic sacrifice in service of ideological confrontation has been visibly eroding for years. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps can sustain military operations. It cannot sustain military operations while simultaneously managing domestic economic collapse and a coalition of 35 nations applying coordinated pressure on every available leverage point. Back-channel negotiations through Oman and Qatar, the 2 corridors that have historically carried the invisible freight of Middle Eastern diplomacy, are almost certainly already active. They always are at this stage. The question is not whether talks are happening. The question is whether Tehran's internal power structure can accept an agreement without fracturing. Here is your signal to watch. If Brent crude drops sharply below $95 per barrel without any visible catalyst, no ceasefire announcement, no diplomatic statement, no obvious supply shock, de-escalation has already begun in a room with no cameras. The oil market will know before the press release exists. Scenario 2, the technological stalemate. Probability, 35%. Neither side crosses the final threshold. Iran continues probing attacks below the level that triggers full coalition military response. Britain and its allies maintain the multi-layered defense architecture indefinitely. The Strait of Hormuz becomes what security analysts would classify as a permanent gray zone. Technically navigable, functionally hazardous, commercially catastrophic. War risk insurance premiums for vessels transiting Hormuz have already reached levels that make certain cargo routes economically unviable. In a stalemate scenario, those premiums do not normalize, they institutionalize. Shipping companies reroute. Supply chains restructure around the assumption that Hormuz is permanently compromised. And here is the dimension that no energy analyst is discussing loudly enough. A permanent gray zone in Hormuz accelerates the strategic repositioning of regional energy infrastructure towards Southeast Asia. Malaysia, Vietnam, and Indonesia sit at the intersection of alternative LNG transit corridors that suddenly become extraordinarily valuable. This is not speculation about a distant future. The shipping rerouting calculations are already being run inside every major energy trading desk in Singapore and Tokyo. Your signal for scenario 2. If LNG charter rates on the Middle East to Northeast Asia route exceed $250,000 per day and hold at that level for more than 3 consecutive weeks, the market has accepted the stalemate as the new baseline. Scenario 3, the miscalculation, 20% probability. But the consequences are not linear with the probability. One misidentified radar signature, one drone that loses its electronic suppression mid-flight and strikes a civilian vessel instead of falling harmlessly into open water. One commander in a high-pressure situation who interprets an ambiguous contact as hostile and responds before verification completes. Modern warfare at this density of assets, this complexity of electronic environments, and this level of political tension has a known historical property. Accidents happen. And in a conflict where 35 nations have already signed a joint military posture statement, an accident does not stay an accident for long. In this scenario, HMS Anson does not remain a psychological deterrent. It becomes an operational instrument, a single tomahawk strike against Iranian naval infrastructure, not to destroy, but to demonstrate, would send a message that no diplomatic communique can replicate. Iran would understand immediately and completely that the submarine they could not find had been 40 miles offshore the entire time. The cascading economic consequences of Scenario 3 are severe enough that most institutions have not modeled them publicly. Oil at $180 per barrel is the conservative estimate. Global financial markets would reprice geopolitical risk across every asset class simultaneously. Your signal: if Japan recalls its ambassador from Tehran, not suspends relations, not issues a formal protest, actually recalls the ambassador, Scenario 3 has already begun its opening sequence. Watch the signals, not the headlines. Let me leave you with the one principle that explains everything we have covered tonight. Not a military principle, not an economic formula, a law of power that operates identically whether you are commanding a nuclear submarine in the Arabian Sea or making a decision that determines your own future. The most dangerous position in any conflict is not weakness. Weakness can be compensated for. Weakness can be concealed. Weakness can be converted into asymmetric advantage through patience and precision. The most dangerous position is visible strength that has stopped learning. Iran had real power, documented, tested, battle-proven across 20 years of proxy warfare and asymmetric engagement. That power was genuine, and it became a trap because Tehran confused familiarity with mastery, and yesterday's winning formula with tomorrow's viable strategy. Britain had less visible power, fewer headlines, no aircraft carriers sailing dramatically through Hormuz for the cameras, just quiet systems, invisible submarines, autonomous machines clearing minefields without a single sailor at risk, and a 35-nation coalition built at a diplomatic table while Iran was still composing its threat announcements. The person who needs the deal less always wins. The force that cannot be located cannot be countered. The weapon that costs nothing to operate per engagement cannot be exhausted. Hormuz 2026 has just written a new chapter in the doctrine of invisible power. So here is the question I am leaving with you today. Of the three scenarios we mapped, managed de-escalation, technological stalemate, or catastrophic miscalculation, which one do you believe is already underway right now? Leave your answer below. Make your case. And subscribe. Because the next move on this board will not wait for the morning news cycle.
Okookoko.